So first, thank you so much for sitting down with me, Dr. Kingery. As you know, we're celebrating or recognizing Parkinson's Disease Awareness Month. So we thought it would be great just to sit with one of our clinical science leaders to talk about some of the work that Cogstate is doing in this area. So if you don't mind, can you start just by giving us a quick introduction to your background and your experience in Parkinson's research?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist and a director of clinical science at Cogstate. I've been with Cogstate now 9 years. My interest in Parkinson's started about 20 years ago during my postdoctoral fellowship in neuropsychology at Johns Hopkins. And then after leaving fellowship, joined at the time the CRO I3 Research, where I first got involved in clinical trials in Parkinson's, and that interest has continued over the past 20 years.
So I know your focus at Cogstate is really around some of the rater training and central monitoring of the clinical assessments in these trials. Can you tell us a little bit about why that's important in Parkinson's research in particular?
Yeah, so there are several reasons. I think first, just from a experimental scientific perspective, the goal in any experiment is to isolate one variable and see what its effect is, and keep everything else standardized as much as possible. And when you're dealing with a multi-center, multi-country clinical trial, that is a very significant challenge. And our goal in our training and monitoring efforts is to foster and help ensure that the assessments, the outcomes are done in a standardized and consistent manner. What we help ensure is that the raters who do the scales at the site have a fundamental understanding and baseline of competence. The real challenge is when you do a large study or a phase 2 or a phase 3 clinical trial, many of your raters have limited to sometimes no experience doing some of these tests. Some of them have decades of experience doing them, and then most of them are fall somewhere in the middle. And so we have a very heterogeneous group of people doing these tests, and our goal is to help try to promote consistency amongst a heterogeneous group. In terms of central monitoring, the value there, I view central monitoring as a type of insurance in that we are able, through reviewing forms, through reviewing audio recordings of the test, to determine if they were done well. And the good news is that most raters actually do quite well. And the real risk that that is posed for these studies is a small number of raters, for various reasons, who can make errors on these tests that can have a large impact on the reliability and the validity of the tests. And through our central monitoring programs, we're able to identify raters who are having difficulty and then work collaboratively with them to help get them up to speed, to help them improve their skills, so that we can prevent these sorts of errors in the data.
So you talked a little bit about the clinical outcome assessments, the sort of conventional assessments, and how we've supported those. But I know Cogstate does a lot of work around the more automated computer sort of enabled computerized cognitive tests. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that Cogstate's doing in that space with respect to Parkinson's disease trials?
Yeah, so the real key advantages, I think, and the rationale for many of the Cogstate computerized tests is, in contrast to many of the traditional, or sometimes called paper and pencil, neuropsychological tests, is that they truly are rapid tests. They're brief tests. They're repeatable the way they've been designed. They're simple, and they're sensitive to cognitive changes. And they don't require the sort of level of training and the psychometric skills inherent in most, typical neuropsychological tests. And there's very strong evidence for cross-cultural validity and linguistic validity across countries. And so there are a lot of advantages to the Cogstate test, not specific to Parkinson's, but certainly is valuable in the context of accurate and valid measurement of cognition in Parkinson's disease.
So, you covered sort of the computerized endpoints and some of the more traditional clinical assessments, and they sound pretty central to these studies. So I'm curious if you can give us a sense for how they've been administered sort of in this pandemic environment where social distancing measures may have pushed, more things at home. How have these been implemented?
The good news is that there is a very large body of research looking at teleneuropsychology, which shows that many of the traditional tests, standard tests that have been done, some tests specifically developed for audio use, can be done well and can gather reliable and valid data. There are challenges, though, and what we try to help sponsors is to, if needed, make any necessary adaptations to the scales so that ultimately, when the FDA provided some guidance on this in July of last year, I thought that one of the key messages in that guidance is that these tests should be done in a manner as similar as possible to the assessments being conducted on site. So you want to try to preserve as best you can all of the features of the test as it's done on site, but using, again, either audio and video with video technologies. And so we've worked with several different sponsors and working to adapt these tests to use in audio and video context.
I was also curious, is there any sort of technology advancements or where things are moving directionally by way of technology in Parkinson's disease that you're excited about, that's bringing the research forward?
Yes. So I think the biggest trend, and it's not just in Parkinson's, but it's very much impacts the Parkinson's study, is the transition from paper to electronic source documents, or ECOA, electronic clinical outcome assessment. Yeah. That has been happening, as you know, for many years, several years now. But that trend is here to stay, and thankfully so. The advantages are, much quicker access to the data, much more efficient application and implementation of central monitoring, where we have our expert neuropsychologists around the world access the forms, access the audio, access the video if incorporated. The process is just night and day compared to trying to do this with paper, which we used to do, emailing audio files and things. And so this has just had an enormously positive impact on the ability for us to help ensure the data quality is high, as well as provide the kind of more immediate feedback and useful feedback, hopefully, to the raters to work with them to help improve if we do observe issues. With Parkinson's, the next trend, I would say, is the development of electronic diaries. It's related to, the transition from paper to ECOA, but in Parkinson's and many studies looking at dyskinesias or various other, motor states and motor symptoms, diaries have been used for decades now. They've shown to be useful in many respects, but they have significant limitations. And so the transformation from paper diaries to electronic diaries is also a major ongoing effort. And the other area, I think, and it's really more, there's been research a fair amount over the years, of course, but it's still very much emerging, and that is the use of various mobile health technology, wearable sensors, in Parkinson's. This is a vast and diverse area of research, and there's still a lot of work to be done to determine what are the best approaches. They're complex data analytic and technology, operational, regulatory considerations, as well as important scientific considerations.
And then I guess last, since we are here in recognition of Parkinson's Awareness Month, is there any resources in particular, either for patients or researchers, that you really want to highlight in terms of raising awareness?
Sure. As a scientist and neuropsychologist, I encourage patients, researchers to explore the published, literature. The scientific publications is the first recommendation. Another resource that I've in particular found useful is receiving alerts through email programs. I have an alert, a daily alert, that's keyed to the phrase Parkinson clinical trial. It's really nice to be able to scan through and see if there's anything of particular interest. So I personally found that very useful. The last thing, thinking on the technology side of things, is there are at least 4 really good podcasts available that cover a really wide range of Parkinson's topics related to Parkinson's for both patients and researchers. The first and the longest standing, now I think on their 10th year, is the Michael J. Fox Foundation podcast, which is incredible. I have dozens of episodes available through their website. The Parkinson Foundation has a podcast called Substantial Matters, and they have just over 100 recordings, again, on a very wide range of topics. The MDS started a podcast about 2 years ago and have a number of really, really excellent podcast resources there. And then finally, there's a foundation called the Davis Finney Foundation for Parkinson's. They also have a number of really useful podcasts focused mostly on patient support and caregiver support. But those are the 4 that I've found are really, really helpful. So if you're making dinner, you can turn on a podcast and be informed at the same time.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Lisle. I think this has been great to hear your perspective and all the great work that you're doing in the space.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.